Good evening. I know that you do understand this, but I give it to you because you will have occasion every single day of your life to remember what I am saying to you. The temptation in our work is to try to improve the human scene. We see a sick person and our first normal reaction is to want to see them well. We see an unemployed person and the very first thought is of how we can bring about employment. We see a poor person, and the first thing that comes to us is how to bring supply to them. We see an unhappy person, and our first thought is how to bring happiness to them. And if we persist in that, we will fail in our ministry. It is for this reason that even though you perceive what I'm saying to you now, tonight, that you will be under the same temptation tomorrow to violate it. And the next day, and the next day, and you never will outgrow it. Never unto the end of your days on earth will you overcome the temptation, at least once in a while, to automatically, in giving treatment, unconsciously desire to change the appearance into its opposite. Now that is natural to you, and that is natural to me. That is natural undoubtedly to Jesus Christ, or otherwise he would not have had to go away 40 days to the mountaintop to renew himself. He would not have had to go away from his disciples every once in a while to renew himself, because the only renewal that we ever need is to break the mesmerism of appearances. That is the only reason we ever have to pray. That is the only reason we ever have to commune. That is the only reason we ever have to go away to be still. There's no other reason. We are already beyond the temptation of stealing. We are already beyond the temptation of committing adultery. We are already beyond the temptation of lying or cheating or defrauding. So we don't have to go way to the mountaintop to pray about those things. But while we are not mesmerized by those forms of error, we are still mesmerized to some degree with good humanhood. We are not easily tempted into the bad side of humanhood, but we are easily tempted towards the good side of humanhood. And of course the good side of humanhood is only the opposite of the bad side, and in the end can be just as bad as the bad. So it is that, first of all, when we sit down to help ourselves or others, our first realization must be, or at least one of the realizations must be, I am not trying to change sick matter into healthy matter. I am not trying to change a little matter into a lot of matter. I am not trying to make unhappy people happy. My aim in this meditation is to realize, behold, and demonstrate the Christ. In other words, demonstrate Christhood of your being, of my being, his being, or her being. And that is why we are never attempting to get something or to get rid of something. We are never attempting to draw something to us or to force something away from us. Our entire ministry is Christ realization. Now, you, in your true identity, and this means he, she, or it, and their true identity is the Christ, is the offspring of God now. And there's nothing that you or I can do to make it so. It already is so. God already is the life of individual being. God already is the soul and the spirit and the mind. God already is the integrity of every individual. That is established in the beginning before Abraham was. But it is not manifest. It is not visible until one, and one with God is a majority, until one individual can sit in silence and realize the Christ, spiritual identity, true identity. Now, of course, the Christ will never take form in your mind so that you won't see perfect man. You will only realize or understand or feel Christ. Christ isn't visible to the eyes, audible to the ears. Christ can't be touched with the fingers or smelt or tasted. Christ is really what you and I are, incorporeality, a state of divine consciousness. That is what we are. That is not what we appear to be to each other. Looking out through the eyes, we behold a finite concept, a limited concept, a material concept of that which actually is. The only way that I can describe this to you is to tell you that if you were to show me one of these 100,000-pound masterpieces of painting which are sold so often in Christie's, it would mean nothing more to me than some colored paint on canvas, and I probably wouldn't give you 10 pounds for it so far as value is concerned. It wouldn't represent more than that to me, because I have no awareness of what you would call painting. None whatsoever. It's entirely different if you were to show me bronze, ivory, wood, tapestry. There, the situation would be different. I might see 1,000 pounds in something that another person may not see 10 pounds in, because I do perceive the nature of those things which I don't in a painting. In the same way, without a music appreciation, you may hear the most glorious piece of music in all the world and beg somebody to turn it off before it breaks your ears. So it is with this. We look out with our eyesight, which means with our limited, finite senses, and we are looking at God's masterpiece. You. That's God's masterpiece, his own offspring of his own being, his own self made individually manifest. And beholding it without spiritual apprehension, we say, isn't this worthless? Do you see that? Now, with your eyes closed to all appearances, and with the realization that it makes no difference who has called you for help, someone with the deepest dyed sin, for all we know, someone in a physical distortion beyond description. With eyes closed and the remembrance, Father, I'm not trying to change this picture. Give me thy grace to behold him as he is. Awaken me out of this mesmeric dream so that I do not judge by appearances. Let me see him as he is, and I will be satisfied with this likeness. Here indeed is the Christ of God, the very spiritual offspring of divinity. Grant me thy grace that I may see him as he is, that I may see the situation as it is. Reveal Christ where there seems to be a human being. And then as you sit in that silence, waiting, the Spirit of God touches you and illumines you, inspires you, and for a brief, fleeting second, it is almost as if you could see or touch reality. Sometimes smell it. Sometimes in this deep meditation of realization, the whole room is filled with the perfume of flowers. Completely filled. There may not be a flower within a mile of you, but the entire room is bathed in a perfume of flowers, and this also is the Spirit of God. It may come as music. It may come in music that has no earthly tones. It makes no difference how it comes. It may come as a light, or it may come as a deep breath. Whichever way it comes, if you have been clear that what you are seeking is not changing a human being from bad to good, or rich to poor, or poor to rich, or unemployed to employed, or sick to well, but what you are seeking to behold is not humanhood but divinity, then sooner or later the experience will come to you. It'll only be momentary, but in that momentary flash, your patient will be improved, benefited, healed, employed, enriched, whatever the situation may demand. Certainly there are those instances where the fullness of the healing does not appear in that realization, regardless of how deep it may be, and you may be called upon to do it twice, 3 times, 5 times, 10, or 100, because the opacity may lie with your patient or student in that before they can experience the harmony, there must be a change of consciousness, which is to be outwardly pictured as the harmony. Always remember that we are not healers of the body. Remember, we do not change the body at all. Our work changes the consciousness of an individual, and the changed consciousness appears outwardly as harmony, health, supply, companionship, whatever the need may be. Now, of course, you know that one of the great stumbling blocks is that most people have a definite idea of what it is they're seeking when they ask for help. And of course, that may not fit in at all with a spiritual picture. I have told you of my struggles to have 5 practitioners help me to increase my business, and with each practitioner my business got worse until I didn't have any. And that surely looked like lack of demonstration, but you see, it was my perfect demonstration, because only when I had no money left did I go into this work. And I suppose if my business had prospered, it may still have been delayed, or even prevented in this lifetime. So it is that many people come to us for help, but they have a definite idea what it is that they want. They have a definite idea of how harmony should appear in their experience, and sometimes even when. But you see, that really is not a part of our ministry. We are not aiming at having instantaneous healings. They're wonderful when they take place if they fulfill their spiritual mission. But that is not our object. Our object is the changing of consciousness. The changing of an individual's consciousness from a material sense of life to the spiritual awareness of life. From a material sense of religion to a spiritual sense of religion. From a material sense of supply to a spiritual sense of supply. And you see, we are the ones, when the right help is given us, we are the ones who should be responding in accordance with God's will. And we thought this by having in our mind how the demonstration should come out, and when, and to what extent, and so forth and so on. It is like parents sometimes write me for help. Their son is going up to answer the draft, and is afraid he may not make it. Will I help him pass and get into the draft? And another parent is desirous of having their son flunk the draft. Now you see, you can't pray to God both ways. And that parent would write you a letter if that son got into the draft and soon got himself injured or killed. They would soon be writing you, what did you do? I thought you were going to God for my son, and look what's happened to him. Yes, but you asked that he get in, and he's in. No, even if they want it, we can't do that. Our realization would not be of a man in or out. Our realization would be of Christ's identity, of God fulfilling itself as the life of this individual. And then we would have to be satisfied whatever direction that young man's path would take. Now, this can never be repeated to you too often. Because over and over that temptation will be, I must save this person's life. I must restore their sanity. So forth and so on. Bring about peace in their household. Peace may be the worst thing to have in the household for their spiritual progress. And so it is, we do not outline. We do not desire, but neither do we judge, criticize, or condemn. We turn completely from the human scene, with its good side or its bad side, and we pray for the revelation of Christ in our consciousness. When I use the word Christ, you understand that I mean your spiritual identity, or God's spiritual plan for you, or spiritual illumination. In our Christian mysticism, we use the word Christ to mean that which you in your true identity are, the Son of God, the child of God, the offspring of God. Actually, it would make no difference if we were to say revealed Buddha, because it means exactly the same thing, enlightened one, or Christ self, Christed one. So it isn't always, it makes no difference what our terminology may be. When we turn within, let us realize that we are turning within to behold the spiritual reality where humanhood is confronting us. And then, when we have that second of spiritual realization, which to us is interpreted to mean we have beheld the very Christ of God, the very spiritual reality of being, this then touches the consciousness of the patient or student and begins to transform it. You see, all experience is being transformed by the renewal of the mind, being renewed by the transforming of the mind. In other words, changing our nature from the man of earth to the man who has his being in Christ. Now there are two of us. There is the man of earth, which we are as human beings. There is the man who has his being in Christ, which is our true identity. The goal of life is to die daily to that man of earth, which we are as human beings, so that we may be consciously reborn as the spiritual being which is our true identity. Now, I'm going to explain to you how this all happens, how humanhood is perpetuated in us, how it is overcome, and spiritual identity is realized and demonstrated. This is something that you will not give to your patients or your students. This is something that you will live with until you have actually demonstrated it in a great measure. A great measure. Because otherwise, giving out what you haven't got will not benefit the other fellow and may deprive you. Do not give out spiritual truth that you yourself have not attained some measure of realization. Last year, more than this year, you read about this new discovery of subliminal perception, which was a form of advertising in which a message was flashed on a moving picture or television screen so quickly that the viewer never saw it and never heard it. You never became conscious that it was taking place, either by sight or hearing. And yet, all of a sudden, you felt the urge to do what they told you to do. In one of their experiments, they told you in the midst of a moving picture in a theater to get up and go downstairs and buy Coca-Cola and popcorn. And in that few minutes, their sales increased 57% over their normal sales of popcorn and Coca-Cola. In another experiment on television, in your home, the message was flashed, go to the telephone. And you got right up in the midst of this interesting picture, and you went to the telephone, and when you got there, wondered what you were doing, and then remembered that you didn't want to telephone to anybody, and so you went back to your seat, not knowing that you had been acted upon. Your mind had been played upon. You had been used by the mentality of other people, and you had been made to obey their instructions. Now, England was offered the first opportunity to buy this and passed it up and decided that it wouldn't be interested, and it was bought in New York and experimented with, and it has now been dropped. So for all intents and purposes, it may amount to nothing further in the world's history. But it's going to serve an important point, since with that I'm going to illustrate why we are human beings, why we are kept human beings, why we sin, why we have false appetites, why we are poor, why we are ever sick, and why we eventually die. It is because of this very thing, subliminal perception. As you go back to the infinite way, the early books, you will see that it is written there that you are not responsible for any error that is touching your life, not even responsible for sins for lack, for hate, envy, jealousy. You're not responsible for a bit of that. All of that is a universal activity. The activity of that which Paul called the carnal mind. Now, he summed it all up in that term, the carnal mind. Centuries later, Mrs. Eddy coined the term mortal mind. If you like, you can use some of those terms or terms that we have in the Infinite Way, like universal belief or universal hypnotism, universal mesmerism, anything you like, because what is happening is that all of these sins, diseases, deaths, lacks, limitations, old age, all of this is a part of the vast universal ignorance, or call it the universal mind, not the divine mind, the universal mind of man, the carnal mind, or the mortal mind. And it is pumping its thoughts, its beliefs and theories into you and into me. And so it is that, let us say that a baby is born, and before it can even think, it's placed in a draft, and the next thing it has a cold. Now, it wasn't its wrong thinking that gave it a cold. And you can't blame it on its nurse or its parents, because they weren't thinking a cold for the child. But the universal belief that getting in a draft gives a cold immediately operated in what they now call the subconscious mind of the baby, and the baby responded to it. In the same way, every carnal thought, whether of a material, mental, moral, or financial nature, every material thought, every thought of false ambition, greed, lust, animality, hate, injustice, unkindness, not one single bit of that is yours or mine. It is all part of this vast mental illusion, if you want to call it that. And yet, every human being is subject to it, and each one falls for some particular phase of it at whatever happens to be their weakest point. Now, all of this is brought about unconsciously on our part, and probably unconsciously on anyone else's part, for there isn't such a person as a devil doing this to us in a personalized sense, and neither is there anybody in the world wicked enough to be capable of doing it to humanity. It is an aggregation, you might call it the sum total of everything that has happened since the days of Adam, of a selfish or personal nature that forms everything that has come up out of the original belief in two powers, good and evil. All of this sum total of evil is now floating right here in this room. Some of it has been brought in by nothing personal or other than what we will call carnal mind. Some of it is in this room by virtue of radios or televisions that may be nearby that are carrying it. We're not aware of it because it's not plugged in, but it's here. It's going through this room. And so it is that we are responding to the medical beliefs. We are responding even to the theological beliefs. If you knew how many people are sick because of their fear of hell and damnation, or fear of punishment, or fears of God that have been pumped into them in childhood, you would know that all manner of theories and beliefs are just lurking around in the air, and we, knowing nothing about this, the world knowing nothing about this, wakes up one day and finds itself with a cold, wakes up the next day, finds itself with indigestion, and the next day desiring to a diamond that it can't afford and has to finally steal, and so forth and so on. When you've worked enough with the sins of mankind, you'll find how true it is that there isn't really a sinner in all the world. I have never yet met a person who could rightly be termed a sinner from the standpoint of really and truly wanting to sin. Every single one I have ever met, every single one of any degree, has revealed sooner or later that whatever this is that's happening through them, they don't want any part of, but they don't know how to be free of it. When you would say the same thing about the ills that you suffer or the poverty that you suffer, you would say, certainly I don't want any part of this. This is no part of me. This is no part of my will or desire. Well, then where does it come from if you aren't doing it? And then you have to shrug your shoulder and say, I don't know. Now I'm telling you, it's coming out of that same area of consciousness that may be likened to that activity of the subliminal perception. It is something being whispered into your unconscious or subconscious. You, knowing nothing about it, respond to it. And that is the discovery that I made that started all of this work way far back in the early 1930s. I saw that there is no personal evil. I saw that evil is never personal and that it can be separated from any individual once they themselves have realized that the time has come. Now, the next step makes the healing work very easy. You see, this step makes it possible for you never to hold your patient or student in any form of condemnation, criticism, or judgment. That enables you to free everyone who comes to you instantly the moment you know, why, this isn't your fault, this isn't your doing, you are not responsible for this. And right there and then you've lifted such a load. You don't have to voice it, you only have to think it. And you have lifted such a load from your patient or student that their shoulders go back quickly. They don't know why, but they feel a sense of freedom. And it is because you have lifted the burden of guilt and responsibility from their shoulders by realizing this isn't you, this isn't a part of you, this is the carnal mind. Now you take the second step. Since God is, and since God is infinity, immortality, eternality, since God is omnipotence, the carnal mind isn't power. And it hasn't the power to express itself through us once we have realized God as the only power. It can only operate in the consciousness of a person who has two powers. Whether or not they have these two powers consciously or unconsciously, until they consciously renounce the power of evil and recognize it as non-power, it will operate in them. But the very moment that you come along and realize carnal mind with its sum total of evil, sin, disease, death, lack, limitation, age, anything you want, is a non-power, is only an illusory belief in mind. In the universal mind, not in your mind or mine, the universal mind. And it therefore is not a power. It exists like 2 times 2 is 5 exists. You see, 2 times 2 is 5 is a tremendous power in the mind of the person who believes it. Because he's always going to give out 5 for 4, and in the end he'll be broke. But once it is recognized that 2 times 2 is 5 is not an entity or an identity or a substance or a law, it's a nothingness. You're free. Your patient is free. Now, at this stage of your spiritual unfoldment, if the carnal mind or somebody operating subliminal perception were to tell you, to do this, that, or the other thing, do you know that you wouldn't do it? You already know enough of the one mind so that you would not respond to that suggestion. And even at this point, on many, many, many things, this universal carnal mind cannot find outlet through you. You are already at the point where you cannot be tempted to fall for many, many things that this world is falling for. In other words, you can't even be tempted to fear. You can't be tempted to fear a war. You can't be tempted to fear the bombs. You can't be tempted to fear the next bit of infection or contagion that you read about in the newspaper, or the next epidemic. In other words, the carnal mind has already lost a great deal of its power over you. If you were awakened in the morning and found yourself completely without funds, I doubt that you could be frightened, because somewhere the thought would come, makes no difference. God's manna falls every day. God's grace is my sufficiency, and there'd be no fear. But just think what would happen to the person not knowing this, who believed that lack was an actual condition. So it is. I am sure that most of you are already at the stage where you very seldom, if ever, have a cold or grip or flu or some of these ailments that are common to people through bad weather. And I've already perceived since my trips to London that we do not have the proportion of rheumatism that is reported in the healing circles of England. When you speak to these healers, evangelical healers and so forth, you find out that 80% of all their patients and of all the people who come to them are just crippled with rheumatism. Well, I haven't noticed any 80% in any of our metaphysical meetings or classes or lectures. In other words, you are that degree free of the mesmeric suggestion that weather or climate has to produce these terrible rheumatic claims. Do you follow that? Now, it lies within your power to attain 80 or 90% freedom, and probably ultimately 100, but we'll watch for that anyhow. But at least 80 or 90% right now, by recognizing this, that as of this moment, the carnal mind cannot find outlet through you, inlet to you or outlet through you. Since in your true being, your Christhood, you are one with God, and it is the impartations from God which constitute your bread, your wine, your water, your substance, your resurrection, the harmony of your being. In other words, I am consciously one with God, and all that the Father hath is mine, and only that which is of the Father is mine. I am an instrument through which and as which God appears on earth. I am an instrument through which and as which God lives. In other words, there is no me. That which you identify as me is God appearing as me. It is the life of God, the soul of God, the mind of God, the reality of God, the allness of God made individually manifest. And my oneness with God constitutes my oneness with that mind which was in Christ Jesus, with the very soul which is God. I am the inlet and the outlet for all that is heavenly and divine, and only that which is heavenly and divine. And the devil cometh and findeth nothing in me, says the Master. Moral mind or carnal mind may present itself to me, and I am not home to it. I do not receive it or respond to it. I do not hear it, taste it, touch it, smell it. For that which constitutes the carnal or mortal mind is not entity or identity, but illusory belief, appearances. You might call them temptations. This picture of mortality that presents itself to me is a temptation to me to believe in the entity and identity and reality of mortal creation. This all may be traced to the second chapter of Genesis. You see, in the first chapter of Genesis, you have God's pure creation. But in the second chapter of Genesis, you have the creation of the carnal mind, including man, through whom temptation can operate. Now, the man of the second chapter of Genesis is the human being, or what Paul calls the man of earth, which must die. And the man made in the image and likeness of God, constituted of all God qualities, that is the man who has his being in Christ. Now, when you determine that I shall live by the grace of God, not by external things or persons, that the grace of God is my sufficiency, that in the presence of God is my fullness of life, and I no longer am dependent on man whose breath is in his nostril, not even princes, and I'm no longer dependent on thoughts or things, since I'm consciously one with my creative principle, God, Spirit, and therefore my life is spiritually governed, spiritually guided, spiritually fed, spiritually lived. Now, from the moment that you recognize that all error is impersonal, never blame a person for any form of evil, yourself or anyone else, remembering that every form of evil is as impersonal as every form of good. Never can you take credit for being good or just or benevolent or moral, honest, loyal, faithful. That's an impossibility. Whatever of such qualities we possess are God qualities. They represent God expressing itself as our individual qualities, characteristics, and nature. Whatever evil may be expressing itself through you or me at any given moment is the degree in which we are accepting carnal mind as power, and either ignorantly or carelessly permitting it to function in us. That is why the Master says, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. You've got to know it. And you have to know it consciously. And until the carnal mind is completely dead in you, you have to know it constantly. This does not mean to set up two powers and start protecting yourself from one of them or fearing one of them. Remember, I have told you in the past that in the earliest stages or days of Christian Science, Mrs. Eddy recognized mortal mind as a term denoting nothingness. And it was only afterward that students began to look on mortal mind as if it were a power to be afraid of. And they began to say, look what mortal mind is doing to me, or can you give me some protection from mortal mind today? Do you follow that? And so mortal mind became the same power that in religious circles the devil had. Do you see that? Now, the enlightened Christian scientist of today, the one who is still doing good healing work, is one who has never lost sight of the fact that mortal mind isn't a power but a term denoting nothingness. Not something to be fought, overcome, risen above, or destroyed. There aren't many such, because that term mortal mind has fooled so many. And where that hasn't fooled them, personalizing error has. So that you find some who fear Roman Catholicism, and you find some who fear Judaism, and some who fear Orientalism, and some who fear communism. And by personalizing it, they have made themselves victims of it. Do you see that? Now, it is in the same way as if you were to go around fearing that you might steal. Just keep fearing it often enough, and you probably would succumb sooner or later. Or fearing an accident. Just drive a car fearing an accident long enough, and I'm sure you can coax yourself into one. So it is. If you personalize error in any form, you are making yourself a victim of it, and your patients and your students. That's why it is an error to say to a patient or a student, you must be more loving, or you must be more forgiving, or you must be more grateful. That's all nonsense, because that is personalizing the error. If you find that your patient is not loving, is not kind, is not gentle, is not spiritual, then relieve your patient of that burden by realizing these negative qualities don't belong to you. They're part of the carnal mind, and the carnal mind is the arm of flesh, nothing. And free your patient. Don't hold them in bondage to it. Certainly, how often it happens that a patient says, oh, my trouble is sensuality, or the practitioner says, oh, I've discerned that you're too sensual. Oh, you see, that just pins it on to the individual and makes healing an impossibility. If you do detect those things, then it's only a sign that this individual is being handled by that subliminal perception, that universal or carnal mind in that way. Then realize that this is an attribute of that nothingness called carnal mind, and it cannot use the child of God as an avenue, as a channel, as an instrument, because it's a nothingness itself. No presence, no power, no law to sustain any such thing. Now, recognizing the fact that a human being is only a human being because the carnal mind is pumping itself into them and through them and being accepted as a power, you know how to die daily to your humanhood. That is by being very sure in the morning, and certainly again at night before sleeping, to realize that the so-called theories, opinions, beliefs, the whole of the carnal mind is not a power, has no avenue of expression, no law to sustain it or maintain it, and I am one with God. I and my Father are one, and the qualities of God constitute my qualities, and I am an instrument and an avenue through which and as which God appears on earth, and the intelligence of God, and the love of God, and the wisdom of God, and the grace of God. All of this finds expression in me, through me, as me, to all of this world, for I and the Father are one. And now I'm dying to my humanhood because subliminal perception is not whispering into my unconscious and making me respond to it. Do you follow that? The mystery of life is really not a mystery. The mystery of life, harmonious, is the understanding of one's true nature, one's true identity, and relating oneself constantly and consciously to one's source. And then realizing that aside from this, nothing is power, nothing is law, nothing is cause, and nothing can have effect. And that is the death of the man of earth. Whenever you come to a practitioner and experience a healing, it is because they have nullified for you the carnal mind and its activity by knowing its non-power. Some practitioners may know that that's what happens, and many do not know that that's what happens. But that is what happens. When you have need of a practitioner, it is only because this carnal mind has found expression in you and through you. And the remedy lies in nullifying it. And nullifying it can only be brought about through the realization of its impersonal nature, and then second, of its non-power. Impersonalize every form of error. Whenever you see it, hear it, taste it, touch it, or smell it, whether it concerns you, your patients, your students, or the strangers down the street, nullify it. Impersonalize every phase of error, no matter what form it assumes. Don't blame it on Mr. Khrushchev, because before him it was blamed on Mr. Hitler, and before him it was blamed on the Kaiser, and before him it was blamed on the Tsar of Russia. And it's all, and we, of course, like to blame it on Mr. Roosevelt. But remember this, it isn't really personal at all. It isn't. Because as fast as you, well, hasn't it been proven of old that assassinating kings and queens and emperors never stop the evil? It never does. It can't. Because the evil isn't personal. And as fast as you get rid of one person, the evil comes right up to attack the next person. Always, evil is impersonal. And we can help all of the dictators of the world by this realization, by loving them as we love ourselves, by realizing that they are no more the centers of evil than we are, even when we have performed it. For we ourselves know that we didn't want to do it. So do they. There isn't one of these people in influential positions today who wouldn't, if he knew how, come into agreement with every nation on the face of the globe. And I'm sure that more than all others, these men who are the heads of Russia today wish much harder than we do that they could find a way to bring about harmony. They can't do it because they'd have to sacrifice the principles of communism, and then they wouldn't exist anymore, because they could never be kept in power under a democracy. You can't imagine the people of Russia voting for those who have been the heads in recent years. And so self-preservation alone keeps them going the way they are going. But in their heart of hearts, they know that at this stage of life, there's nothing ahead of this world but being wiped out by bombs or finding a solution. And you can bet they want to find a solution. And we can help by not personalizing the error, by not believing that evil is man-made, man-created, or man-perpetuated, but by realizing that all of this carnality is the impersonal, universal mind of man, personalized sense of mind of man. And then take the second step and realize, yes, but since God is omnipotent, it isn't power. It isn't present substance or law, and it has no law. And the way may be open, the minds may be clear enough for some divine idea of oneness or unity to break through, and someone may come up with a workable idea. But don't ever believe that anyone will come up with a workable idea while we are sitting in condemnation. No, because that's what the rest of the world is doing too. And there's no one with God to be the majority. But in proportion as we can, just as we release each other, it makes no difference if I discover some human weakness in you, or if you discover some human weakness in me. Don't be influenced by it. I won't be, and you mustn't be. You have to take the position of an advanced spiritual student, which is one who recognizes the impersonal nature of evil regardless of whether it pops up in high places or not. And hold to it, and don't let anybody change you from your understanding of the great fact that all evil is not only impersonal but is in power and has no avenue of operation, no vehicle of operation, no law of maintenance or sustenance. Now, as you practice this in your daily experience, you will find that less and less you are responding to what Jesus called this world. Remember, he said, I have overcome this world. He must have overcome the temptations of this world, not by overcoming one temptation after another. He did that in the wilderness when he overcame the three. But by recognizing that you are of your father the devil, in other words, impersonalizing it, and then realizing, but thou hast no power. There is no power save that which cometh of God. Now, this is the secret of burying the man of earth and resurrecting from the tomb the man who has his being in Christ. And in all my years of work, I have known no other way. I have told it only a few times, because without the background that you have, there is no basis of your understanding it. The first tiny measure of this to come into print will be in the October letter. And carry that with you till it wears out, then get another copy until it appears in book form. Because I have watched and witnessed what this does to an individual's life when they are no longer being influenced against their own will and wish to be stupid, to be mean, to be stingy, to be unloving or unforgiving. I've witnessed what it does when we are no longer responding to mortal mind, carnal mind, human belief. And then when you realize that just as a plant draws its sustenance from the root, so do we now, as that man who has his being in Christ, derive our sustenance from our root, and our root is God. Until tomorrow night, huh?